G'day, and welcome back to Pushing 50. My name's Ben, and today we're going to talk about aviation, part 2 of 4, maybe 5, of scary moments that I've had. This particular part involves friends from Sydney visiting the Hunter Valley, and I took one of their fathers for a fly. So we're in a 1940s Tiger Moth, and took him out over the Hunter Valley, which we consider God's country for flying. And on the way back to the airport, I won't bore you with the initial takeoff, etc. On the way back to the airport, we were around 3 miles to the west of Cessnock Aerodrome, arriving at low levels. So we're on descent at about 600 to 700 feet above ground level. And out of nowhere, a nice, smooth running 6.125 litre 4-cylinder engine started missing on one of the cylinders. Now, being such a large 4-cylinder, one of the cylinders missing creates quite a disturbance through the aircraft and the airframe. You can feel it. You can feel the loss of power. We're now running on 75% power. Not 4 cylinders, but 3. And that made me pucker up quite a bit. I levelled out immediately to try and maintain altitude, because we were at a relatively low altitude, ready for a low-level arrival, being 500 feet above ground, to join downwind on runway 35. Now, I sort of juggled the throttle a little bit to try and figure out what was happening with the engine. When I say juggled, I reduced power initially, then increased power to see if we could maintain altitude or at least climb a little bit. Now, I didn't know what was happening. It was what they call an unobvious engine or partial engine failure. So after only maybe 10 or 15 seconds of altering power settings on the engine, I decided to initiate a pan call, which is where you let other aircraft in the local area know that you have a problem, but it's not an imminent threat. So the call went along the lines of traffic Cessnock, pan, Tiger Moth Echo, Echo India, Echo, Echo India, Echo, Echo India, 2 POB, meaning 2 people on board, 3 miles to the west, low level, partial engine. And that was the end of the call. The reason I did that call was to sort of open up the circuit area. There was a couple of other aircraft in the circuit area, and I needed to be able to basically push in on the downward leg, not be held out of the circuit area, and try and slot in. They then manoeuvred around me, so 1 or 2 of the aircraft came back and understood, and they were spacing appropriately to allow me to enter into the downwind leg of the circuit. So I'm still dealing with this partial engine failure, which is extremely rough running. The vibrations were quite violent, so I reduced the throttle even further. And when you reduce throttle, you've got less speed through the air. The only way to maintain your speed is by lowering the nose, which puts us at a lower altitude. Now, I need to maintain as much altitude as I can, because I'm still 2 miles away from the circuit area or from the airport. So I'm just keeping my speed up. First thing is you've got to maintain speed. If you get too slow, then the aircraft doesn't want to fly anymore, and you stall. You don't drop out of the sky, but you do stall and possibly enter a spin, especially with a 1940s aircraft. So by reducing the throttle, the vibrations through the engine changed, and lo and behold, that missing cylinder came back again to life. So realizing that rough engine running had disappeared, I immediately advanced the throttle into medium to 3/3 throttle, around 1950 RPM, which is enough for me to actually climb as opposed to maintain level. So my idea at that stage was to be able to get as much distance from me and the ground as possible. The friend of a pilot is altitude. No one died colliding with the sky, so immediately adapted that attitude to a shallow climb back towards the airport, and the engine just it stopped doing that problem. There was no evidence of rough running at all, so I didn't want to play around with the throttle any further. We've got the engine back under control, or back under normal operating conditions. Approach circuit, slotted in front of someone who was going slower, just to give us the space that we needed after a pan call, and then did a nice tight circuit so I could always maintain a gliding distance back to the runway if the engine quit altogether, because it was an unobvious partial engine failure. That can escalate very quickly into a complete engine failure because it's unobvious. I don't know what's going on. Uneventful. We do have a aircraft in the background at the moment doing some interesting low-level circuits because I live next to an airport. So uneventful circuit and landing. Went back to the hangar and shut down, no problems at all. So the next step was explaining to my instructor, because he was still my mentor at the time. He didn't really understand what the problem was and didn't actually believe me, thought it was just rubbish, that I'd faked the whole thing. Now, over the coming weeks, I took another friend for a fly, who's actually my neighbour now, and we were around about 5 miles south of the airport, and we were on climb to do a few wing overs, which is just simply a reversal manoeuvre where we come up to like 60-degree angle of bank and reverse our direction and have a little bit of fun above the Stonebridge golf course, which we were a corporate sponsor of. And he wanted to have a look at the area because he owns several properties around the area and was a Stonebridge member. We got up through around about 3,500 feet, and lo and behold, that rough running scenario came back again. And he is a car guy as well. G'day, Jeff. Knows his cars quite well, and he could feel that there was something wrong with the engine as well as I could. So I immediately pointed the nose back towards the airport. We had plenty of height to be able to come back to the airport. In fact, too much. So I've done a straight-in approach for runway 35 again. So a runway that goes from the south to the north. And we needed to lose some height. So we did a few S-turns and then entered into a rather large side slip to wash off additional height that we didn't need, so we could land on the runway nice and safe. A side slip is a cross-controlled manoeuvre where you use your ailerons and opposite rudder. When I say opposite rudder, if you've got left aileron in, you'll use right rudder to balance the aircraft so we can stay in a straight line and use the side of the fuselage to slow the aircraft down. By slowing the aircraft down, we can increase our rate of descent. So that's a side slip manoeuvre, which will become quite important in one of the other parts to aviation, which is probably the most dangerous thing that I've been involved with in aviation. So we continued our descent, no problems at all. Yes, again, the vibration in the engine, the fourth cylinder, which was missing, disappeared. Landed, no event, and taxied back to the hangar. Explained the same situation had occurred again, and at that stage, I guess my instructor and mentor listened, and he's very, very familiar with tiger moths. I learnt to fly with him. So we then sent up one of our line pilots, because I ran Hunter Valley Joy flights, and we did tiger moth flights for the general public. So sent Ryan up, and he climbed to height above the airport. No event. Did a series of orbits over the top of the airport, varying throttle adjustments, etc. And lo and behold, we were able to replicate the same issue in the air. And we could hear the misfiring, or the fourth cylinder missing, from the ground. So finally, my mentor realised that, yes, there is actually an issue. And we decided at that stage to get the aircraft back on the ground. And then on subsequent flights, when the engine was running fine, we flew it over to our maintenance facility, which is around about 7 to 10 miles to the north of Cessnock Aerodrome. So on arrival there, we explained the symptoms of the missing fourth cylinder, and went through aviation's like heaping money on a fire pit. You just go through it when you're trying to chase a problem. So around about $3,000 to $4,000, maybe $5,000 later, we had the head taken off the engine, and the engine is an upside down 4-cylinder engine, which is, as I said before, a capacity of just over 6.1 litres. Very low compression engine. The valves, which are at the bottom of the engine, have a double valve spring. They've got an inner and an outer, because everything with aviation has backups. And the inner valve spring had snapped on one of the cylinders and was intermittently catching on the outer valve spring, which was resulting in the outer valve spring not sealing correctly, and hence the loss of power, and what felt like one of the cylinders was missing. So long story short, around about $7,000 later, the problem was rectified, and the aircraft was back into service, and we were able to continue doing our flights for thousands of people through the Hunter Valley and Sydney and Singapore and Japan and all around the world. So that all started with an international visitor from England who didn't understand the issues, but a pan call, and that was quite an eye-opening experience for me, because I'd never thought that I'd go through something like that so early on in my aviation career, which was only 10 to 13 years long. But that's part 2 of Pushing 50's aviation segment. The next one, we move through to a total engine failure, which was obvious, not unobvious, thankfully, because it was a lot cheaper. In fact, it only took about 2.5 minutes to rectify. That is an eye-opening story, and a lot of people haven't actually done that manoeuvre in a tiger moth. So please tune in again, and thanks for listening to Ben on Pushing 50.